Chapter 21, The Last Endeavor. As the lizards closest to the sky, I brought myself to the desolate mountainside. Amidst the now settled rubble, new saplings were starting to spring up through the rocks, a sign of continuing life. The mountainside colony followed the example of the hardy saplings and continued to stay in the cold and sparsely treed climate. I was as proud of their diligence as I was pained for their continued suffering. The only consolation I could provide them as they worked through the aftermath of the calamity was my unwavering confidence in their fortitude. If I gave them the sky, surely their suffering would decrease. I desperately desired that for them. Over time their primitive feathering had naturally gotten longer, and the slender hair-like bristles were starting to expand and thin, creating more cover with overlapping feathers for insulation. As soon as I had seen the first young lizards born with feathers, I had remembered birds. The only flying creatures here were small insects, along with another small lizard species in the forest obtaining the ability to lightly glide through the trees. Nothing soared overhead but the clouds. I could remember the desire and the envy I felt towards those creatures that flew so beautifully and freely through the sky. But my memory of birds presented one issue. Their arms had served as their wings. I looked at the fruit of my first labor, their hands. Their hands made them powerful, and allowed them to do much more than the lesser creatures around them. Would I have to sacrifice those hands for them to take the sky? I didn't want that. Was it too selfish of me to want them to keep their hands while they soar through the sky? In the first place, perhaps it was too selfish for me to want the sky. They knew not the envy my people had held for that unreachable place. The only flying creatures here were viewed as little more than food, certainly not a thing to be envied. While I debated with myself, I did start the process with what I knew I could do. The feathered lizards had the advantage of being smaller than their forest and shore siblings due to the harsh environment that didn't allow for growth. Weight would be a large factor if flight were to be possible. Muscles were heavy, but so were bones. Thick, solid bones were not good for flight for large animals, that much I knew. They did not need to be thinner, that would make them too brittle. They needed to be hollow. Truly hollow bones would still have been too weak, so inside the cavities must be support structures, a system of internal pillars to strengthen them and continue to carry important nutrients throughout the body. As I began to hollow the bones of developing lizards, I felt something strange. It was almost like a tingling feeling, except I had no body to tingle. What was this strange sensation, I wondered. With my other projects for the lizards complete, I was able to devote more of myself to the task of potential flight, but that feeling always lingered in the background as I worked. Having more of myself to devote to the task, it came much faster than the tending of gills, legs, and other such things when I had spread myself over many projects. Their feathers were already developing in a direction to be longer and more stiff, I merely helped those along. Time was passing, and it was starting to become apparent I'd have to reach my final decision soon. Their bodies were getting lighter, but what purpose would it serve if it did not eventually lead to flight? I was still in turmoil with myself. Did flight lie upon my selfish whims, upon a bright future for my lizards, or somewhere in between? Did I truly want the sky for them, or did I want it for me? The envy for the sky was mine alone, that much I was aware of. I sank back into myself. The pivotal point was coming soon. I must not be wavering when the time came. I let myself fall into the memories of my departed lizards, letting myself feel as they felt during life. They had their share of hardships and struggles, but underlying all that was a feeling of being content with their lot in life. They held ambitions for themselves and for their families, some realized, some not. But lofty goals out of their reach were few and far between. I let myself wander to the lizards I had directly influenced. Bush Tender had made a life for herself tending to her namesake, and she had been very happy. Firestarter, though his life had ended prematurely, had little motivation before the discovery of fire, but found his life given purpose after. And Starlight, I had wondered if she was burdened with the knowledge that there was something more out there, but when I let myself be one with her memory I found both burden and happiness in a delicate balance. She had carried the knowledge with her all her life, and at one point that knowledge had left her feeling betrayed. But in the end, she had come back to embrace it, for she had loved it all along, even if she could not understand it fully. Strong Light had been born influenced, and lived her life as she desired, strongly, powerfully, and beautifully. And then, the little leader. He was the first, the origin of all my influence. He was so far departed from the lizards of the present, but his knowledge of sharing had catapulted all his kind into greatness. Had he not shared his knowledge, it is likely the lizards would still be little more than solitary wanderers content to find food and breed and hoping to live to the next day. They did not know they lacked knowledge and were content in it. But the little leader had shown them more. He had opened doors that could not be imagined. Because he possessed that knowledge, and because he freely gave that knowledge to his fellows, they had grown into the lizards I so dearly loved today. I felt my determination solidify. They did not know the joy of the sky and were content in that. But I would show them. I would share with them the knowledge that lied beyond a horizon they could reach on their own. I would give them the wings to reach it. The tingling sensation that had been remained a quiet buzz in the background became louder as I came to my conclusion. I could feel it in my entire being now. It was a warning. It was not a warning that the sky was out of reach, nor of an impending calamity that would occur. It came to warn me that this would be my last great endeavor. What a worthy endeavor it would be! From the depths of the water, through the dense forests, to the heights of the sky, my lizards would be free to roam as they desired. I would give them that final freedom. Chapter 22, Strength from Weakness. The last endeavor, that phrase filled me with excitement, but at the same time there was also a blemish of dread. As I continued debating how to give them wings, in my uncertainty the blemish became a stain, and soon began to infect the resolve I had finally managed to attain. I began to puzzle the warning I was given. It had been building up for some time, and while I inherently understood what the warning entailed now, I couldn't help but be mystified at how I knew and why it had come only now. It made me feel as though there was something out there, something greater than the sum of myself, watching me. Did I myself have an overseer? It was certainly not impossible. Perhaps it was the same entity that granted me visions of my own memories. Perhaps it was from that part of me that kept memories hidden until I needed them. There was no way to verify the truth. All I could do was ponder many what-ifs. What I did know was that this endeavor, this major change to allow flight, would be the final one. No longer would I be able to make large-scale changes to their anatomy. That was the feeling I came to know from it. As for what would happen after it was complete, that was still the realm of the unknown. There was a sudden pressure hanging over me. What if I didn't get it right? What if I took too long and it wasn't complete? The fear of unknown consequences was frightening indeed. I had finally found my resolve only to run into a new obstacle. The more I thought about it, the more I agonized, my resolve slowly slipping. I didn't want to doom them to some strange half-state incapable of flight, I wanted to empower them. I wanted them to take the sky in their hands. As I suffered from my own internal turmoil, I felt from my family heart a sense of soothing. They attempted to calm me when my doubt was running rampant. I let it wash over me, erasing all my thoughts. I was thinking too much, and it felt good to revel in the unthinking calm of my family heart. The issue wasn't what could go wrong, but overthinking things, looking at all the worst outcomes and trying to see too far into the future. Although I should retain some caution, it would do me no good to fear a future I could not see. I needed to let go of my irrational fears, lest they overwhelm me again. I thanked all my lizards for helping me regain myself, sending a wave of gratitude through them. How lost I would have been without them, with only my uncontrolled and raging thoughts. They always seemed to save me from myself. My thoughts once again under control, I set forth with my mission. The hands I had worked so hard to give them, I was bound and determined to keep them. That meant I must look for another way to give them wings. I kept on a lookout for even the smallest thing that could help me towards that goal. There were no bright lights among the unborn to save me in my time of need. I instead looked to the dimmer lights, those that were weak. There were always many of them, and I had left them alone for their inability to survive on their own. But as my thoughts broadened from being unburdened, I felt I had the power to turn that weakness into a strength. Surely if this was my last major change to them, I could sink all of my power into it. Tens of thousands of tiny lights in many mothers raced to be born and I waded through all of them, waiting for that spark. When it did come, it was not where I had expected. It was an unborn that had already begun growing, or rather two unborns inside one egg. Twins inside eggs were rare, and there were very few instances where they were able to hatch. Nearly all of them died within the first few weeks of development. This particular one was on its way to death. One of the twins was already malformed inside the egg, and when it died, the rot inside the egg would cause the other to perish. An all too common occurrence. The spark came to me then, not from the twins I could not save, but from a memory triggered by them. The memory did not come from a personal experience, but from previously known knowledge. In my people, when a twin died while developing, they sometimes did not die completely. They could be kept alive by the other twin, feeding off its nutrients, and continuing to grow inside it. A parasitic twin. It was not the parasitic twin itself that gave me the idea, but rather remembered images of mutations, deformities, and birth defects. Like most of the weak lights, these things made the body strange, brittle, feeble, sometimes unrecognizable. There were even such things among lizards as periodically those weak lights would fertilize eggs and be strong enough to hatch. Most died young, others lived with the invalids, unable to care for themselves. But there were yet some that did not let their birth differences slow them down. Their bodies might have been weakened, but their hearts were strong. So long as they did not give up, they could make a future for themselves. Such individuals were rare, but they were all the more inspiring for it. A small and frail light could become a bright shining beacon of hope. It was a deformity I now looked for, a strange mutation. They needed another set of arms to mature into wings. They would be small and weak at first, but they would grow strong, and with time, I knew I could shape them to carry my lizards into the sky. That was the future I could make for them. Chapter 23, Proto-Wings. Among the mutations I now sought, ones that duplicated limbs were rare, but I was still able to find several in the mountain colony mothers. I was thankful that the community of lizards took such great care of their weakened brethren, as I was certain nurturing such a mutation would come with additional problems before I could strengthen the desired aspects and work out the more debilitating side effects. I had not before interacted with the weak lights. As soon as I touched them, I could feel just how weak they were. Most were inviable, they carried too many other problems to be safely born, even with my coaxing. Of all the lights that raced to their mother's eggs to be born, only two seemed able to handle the difficulty of bringing themselves into this world. I tried to influence them, to take away or at least lessen other aspects that would burden them while guiding them to the eggs. It wasn't quite like changing scales into feathers. That was just a small signal given different directions. Staving off whole connections from forming was much more intense, even with only two. On top of that, I had to pace myself. It would do me no good to sink all my power into just these two and be unable to work on the coming generations. Using all my gained experience from influencing the lizards for so long, I was much more certain of how it should pan out now that I had a starting point. I felt confidence welling up in me. I can do this, I shimmered such thoughts to myself. The two incubated well, and managed to hatch on their own without assistance, a good sign. The trait they shared was a pair of tiny deformed arms. They connected on the back, slightly askew from where I desired them, but I could work on positioning as the generations progressed. They had an entire second shoulder almost directly behind their existing shoulder. I couldn't put the new set below the original. The wings would need to be capable of forward motion, which wouldn't be possible from lower on the back. The muscles that connected the new shoulders to the rest of the body were weak, but they were at least in place. Although they were second shoulders and arms, they were very small and underdeveloped, and the hand was little more than a nub. They were only about a quarter the size of their real arms. They could be moved, but it was limited and awkward, and sometimes their movements would mimic the real shoulders unintentionally. The progenitors of future flight both wound up being male. They were not treated coldly by their families, but they did live slightly harsher lives. One had weak main shoulder muscles which hampered his ability to carry heavy items. He often suffered from arm injuries after overworking his weak main arms. But that appeared to be the only thing he suffered from. The other male suffered from a misshapen skull, and the entire right side of his face was paralyzed. He lost sight in his right eye and had difficulty eating anything but soft foods. In addition to his tiny second arms, his tail also split halfway down. It wasn't a perfect split either, one side was shorter than the other. And although there was nothing physically wrong with his legs, he tended to limp on the right side, as if his brain had difficulty telling it when to move. They were far from perfect, but they were still loved. The weak-shouldered one found a family of 2 females and another male that accepted him, stubby second arms and all. They often interacted with the second arms as if they were real arms, encouraging him to use and move them when he could. If he had felt any kind of self-consciousness towards his defect before, he embraced it within his new family. The other met a particularly overprotective female defender. They formed a very deep bond, and although her status as a defender would dictate she helped protect the colony, she spent most of her time caring for her beloved. Considered an invalid by most, she treated him as an equal, helping him when he desired it, and giving him encouragement when he tried to accomplish tasks on his own. Returning her love, he found himself crafting her all manner of beautiful decorations, many intricate pieces full of skill and devotion. Had they not met, he likely would have lived out his life among the other invalids, passing each day the same as the last. Her love inspired him, and he constantly pushed his own limits. He even crafted himself a short carved pole to aid him as he walked so he would not require help to get to his destinations. It would be untrue to say I had no doubt they would lead fulfilled lives. Far from it. I had worried greatly for them when they were young. Many looked at them curiously, wondering about the feathered protrusions from their backs. They were unsure what to make of them. Most that had such deformities were unable to break out of their own shells, and died soon after. But these 2 managed to live, a feat in itself. I was still thankful for their loving families that cared for them, that saw them not as an oddity, but as a loved one. The 2 males often interacted with each other, finding camaraderie in their shared misshapen traits, and were great friends throughout their lives. In the weak-shouldered one's family, it was always obvious which children he had sired, considering I went to great lengths to nurture the future wings through new generations. Their children suffered from less maladies than they did, which both fathers were thankful for, particularly the one-eyed father. Because it didn't adversely affect them, I left the split-tail trait alone, and it developed in quite a number of his offspring. Still something of a curiosity, the children of the progenitors also found camaraderie in each other's company, but strangely enough, they rarely formed family units with one another. They seemed to view each other more as siblings than lovers. It was curious even more for me, as I did not influence them to do so, though it worked in my favor to spread their traits around the colony. It didn't take long for the mountainside colony to become inundated with dual-armed lizards as I kept the mutation in each subsequent generation of children. Those that left the mountainside colony for the forest I released from my influence, and more often than not, their children were born without the proto-wings. Sad though I was to see one of them go, I did not want to stop them. For all the influence I used on them, I still wanted them to live their own lives as they saw fit. After some generations, a second mountainside colony finally formed, the advent of bush tending helping ease the destruction of the calamity and providing more abundant food. By this time, the proto-winged lizards were no longer seen as a curiosity, and were just another part of the colony, many of whom helped form the new colony. Their new arms were getting stronger, their feathers longer, long enough to start layering with each other in different sections. Their bones were lightening, and the lungs and hearts expanding to be ready for the additional stress to come. The muscles for their arms were weakened as the muscles across the chest for the wings strengthened. The feathers themselves were taking a more familiar shape, branches of tightly strung together filaments in an oblong shape. Everything was going so smoothly, it almost seemed like a lie. The plans and designs I had laid out were coming along with minimal error, and I was neither overburdened nor met with surprises. It was a strange feeling. I was satisfied, but at the same time I almost felt I desired something more. There was nothing in particular I wanted to occur, just some manner of something. How I would regret hope for any kind of change. Chapter 23.5, Interlude, the One-Eyed, Four-Armed Lizard. He was born misshapen. His family heart was intact, but the rest of him was strange. He knew soon after birth that others viewed him oddly. He did not know what to make of those looks. As he grew older, he learned to recognize those looks. Pity, sympathy, curiosity. They were not ill-intentioned, but they did feel discomforting. His parents and siblings comforted his distressed heart as best they could, but they did not understand what it was that tormented him. In his colony, he found another like himself with the strange and alien arms growing out of his back. He was grateful to not be alone in his disfigurement. But it also became clear they were not exactly the same. The other one was strong, and so long as he did not overexert himself, he could live normally. Envy grew in his heart. They were friends, comrades even, but that did not stop the jealousy. The one-eyed lizard always seemed to need help with everything, and his family was all too willing to do everything for him. The envy started growing into anger, and his family did not know how to still the pain growing in his heart. When he was old enough, he left his family's pit shelter. He tried to eke out a living on his own, and do everything himself. If only his leg would move when he told it to. If only food didn't slip out of his jaw when he ate. If only those second arms didn't get in the way. If only he could see with his right eye. He was barely surviving on his own. His anger grew so large he would allow none to help him, even when he needed it. He wanted to prove he could be self-sufficient, mostly to himself. It was himself he was angriest at. His desire to be self-sufficient caused him to spurn those that only sought to aid him. He knew that, but he couldn't stop himself now that he'd begun. At one point, while he was carrying wood back to his poorly built shelter, he accidentally dropped his load. His right leg chose that moment to not work, and he tripped over all the wood he had collected, and his left arm came down harshly on the rocks trying to protect his face. It was enough force to break the bone near the elbow. He cried out in agony, blood seeping from sharp cuts against the ground rock. In that instant, all his envy, jealousy, and anger turned into despair. He couldn't do it. If he kept up this ridiculous idea of trying to live on his own, he could wind up killing himself. He almost thought maybe it would be better if he did. He laid there for a while. Those that knew him were afraid to help for fear that he'd lash out at them, and he wallowed in that feeling of self-pity and depression. He was ready to give up. As he began to fall into that unending spiral of misery, he suddenly felt himself lifted from the ground. A strong female, a defender, had lifted him up and slung him over her shoulder. He moved to protest, snapping back to his angry ways, but that blinding pain in his arm stopped him. Since he could only see her back, she sent calming colors through her tail directed at him. As much as he longed to, he couldn't stop his own colors from shouting in pain, and the female shifted him slightly, hoping to put him in a slightly more comfortable position, and she took him to the center of the colony. When he was finally set down, he found himself among the weak, those who could not care for themselves. Lizards like himself. Lost in his dejected thoughts, he didn't see that the female had left and come back. She had 2 short sticks and a long string of flattened twine. His one eye watched her, not particularly interested in this female who had finally sent him to the last place he'd wanted to be, the place he knew he now deserved to be. Sudden pain in his arm turned his vision white. His world swirled violently. He was almost certain he was experiencing the same turbulence as the calamity the first scale songs sang about. He cried out in pain and tried to move his arm, but the female, much stronger than he, held him fast. While the pain didn't dissipate, it did eventually lessen, and with his good eye he looked down upon his left arm. The sticks kept his elbow straight and the twine held his arm in place so it would not move. It was uncomfortable. He moved his right arm to remove the ridiculous thing, but the female's hand shot out and grabbed it, causing him to look at her. Her scales shimmered in warning and danger. He replied in flashes of annoyance, desiring to be left alone. But how she replied shocked him. She motioned to her family heart, shimmering the center of her chest in that familiar light blue all lizards knew. "We are never alone," she shimmered to him, very calmly. He wanted to retort, but was left shimmerless. He knew as well as any that the family heart was always there, always with them. It never helped him build his poor excuse for a hut or procure food, but it watched over him, all of them. He had been on his own for so long now, he had forgotten that simple fact. It humbled him, in a sense, to be so blatantly reminded. Pain and sadness poured out of his own family heart. They had been buried inside his anger. Why did they come out now after all this time? He couldn't stop his dark feathers from shimmering in waves of raw emotion. The female did not say anything to him, but she held him close, comforting him with physical closeness that he had long abandoned. Deep in the back of her throat, a low, soothing purr echoed from her body to his as emotions racked through him. He soon found out the defender had not brought him to the center to live with the invalids, but just to get supplies to dress his broken arm. Being on patrol duty, she often helped not only fend off enemies, but also assisted other lizards that had been wounded outside of the colony. Knowledge of such things as the splint that now graced his arm had been passed down for generations now, though they knew not where it originated from. Although he had been inside the colony borders, she had still seen the injured lizard and took it upon herself to give him aid, just as she would have done for anyone else. She eventually took him back to his poorly erected hut to rest. Despite his protests, she brought him food, but let him eat it on his own. As he tried to rest, he was awoken by rustling noises. He found the female reinforcing his hut so it wouldn't come down on his head, which had happened once in the past already. She replaced the thatching on his roof in properly tied bundles, and restructured the roof apparatus. She basically rebuilt his whole hut. He tried to get her to leave, but she only told him to rest. Unable to stop her, he let her do as she pleased. After being besieged by her goodwill for several days, one day when he woke up he found a piece of wood and a carving tool left on the floor of his hut. He did not have such things, and was certain she must have been the one to bring it. When she stopped by later with fresh water, he questioned her about the tools. She casually mentioned he might be bored while healing. He could use his feet to hold the flat piece of wood, and carve using his good right arm. At first, he didn't touch the obvious present, seeing it with contempt. But the boredom did eventually get to him enough to try his hand at it. He had never tried the arts or crafts other lizards seemed so enamored with. He was lucky enough to be able to put a roof over his head. He started out with simple designs at first and slowly filled the plank with simple lines and shapes. When he filled up one plank with carvings, he would find a new blank piece when he awoke the following day. Thus while his arm healed, for the first time in his life he found a passion. He enjoyed the carving. Even his two tiny mutant arms didn't get in the way. Now engrossed in his carvings, just beyond the vision of his good eye the female watched over him, often shimmering in a smile. After his arm started getting better, the female gave him chores to complete around the hut. Spending so much time there, the one-eyed lizard finally invited her to spend her nights there, since she was always loitering around anyway. If she had another home to go to, she rarely went there. Graciously, she accepted the other fur blanket he kept in his home, a sign that she was at last welcome there. Little by little he noticed his anger at his life fading. If he really sat and thought about it, it was almost peaceful. He hadn't felt so at peace in a long time, maybe never. One day, out of the blue, he questioned why the female did so much for him. She replied that she did only what she wanted and needed to do. And it was true. The things he could handle on his own, she let him do. If he wanted to do something, she let him do it whether he failed or not. If it put him at risk, she would help if he started to lose control over his actions, otherwise she let him do as he liked. In addition to the peaceful feeling, he also felt freedom. He had tried to free himself, acting on his own, not accepting help from anyone, but all it did was serve to remind him how restricted he was. And yet, when she helped him, he didn't feel restricted or held back, he felt more freedom than he ever had in his life. Thanks to her, he could live as he wished. Not some invalid that always had to be taken care of, but just another lizard in the colony. Seeing that he had calmed down, other lizards often offered him help, but it was usually the female defender that turned them down. She was confident in his ability to perform actions on his own. That confidence flowed from her into him, empowering him to do more. She was overprotective in that way, and when he did need help, she always wanted to be the one to help him, hoarding him all to herself. He realized one day that she completed him. She was like his other half. That night, he did not sleep under his own fur blanket, but instead shared with her. She accepted his own willfulness with no questions asked. He didn't know why it had taken so long to realize how he felt about her. She was the only one, no others could compare. His arm had healed long ago, but he never turned her out. Loving colors flashed all over his scales that night, and she responded in kind. After that, he spent his time not only carving, but putting all his love into trinkets to give to his most beloved. He started with a bracelet, perhaps because they had met due to his broken arm. He twined some small pretty stones together, and was able to trade one of his carvings for a pretty seashell from the shores. With the shell as the centerpiece, he presented her with the beautiful gift made just for her. Her colors flashed in a way he had not seen before. A lizard's blush, full of girlish embarrassment, gratitude, and love. Her tail wriggled about mindlessly in sheer happiness. She was so overwhelmed with happy emotions, she almost couldn't even look at the one-eyed lizard or his creation for fear that she would simply burst from the bliss. She had never been given such a gift, especially not from the one she loved with all her heart. Her reaction was so adorable, he found himself wanting to make more things for her. He now enjoyed life in his colony, and all those around him, especially his parents and siblings, were grateful to the female defender who had finally brought peace to his heart. Things like compliments and heartfelt thanks always caused that adorable blushing and embarrassed reaction from her. He was almost a bit jealous that he wasn't the only one to see her that way. He reconnected with his other four-armed friend who had also found a loving family to call his own, already with children in tow. The one-eyed lizard was surprised to find that about half the children shared the same four-armed trait the two four-armed friends had. While the two friends reconnected, the one-eyed's defender played with the children of his friend, and he suddenly felt a desire to see her play with their own children. There were times he thought he shouldn't have children, lest they end up like him, but now he could see in his friend's children that no matter what, they would be all right. They wouldn't be alone. That night, the two deeply and lovingly embraced each other, both hoping to soon have children of their own. Later, as they laid still under the fur blanket, the larger female hugging her one-eyed mate from behind, careful not to squish his second arms, he gently shimmered to her. He asked why she had chosen him. She was silent for a moment in thought as he turned in her embrace to face her and see her response, wrapping his split tail around one of her legs. Finding the words she wanted to say, she relayed that he was a hard worker. He didn't quite understand, but she elaborated. She had always seen him work by himself, despite his maladies, or perhaps in spite of them. He always kept pushing himself forward. She had fallen in love with him long before he met her. And so when he was on the ground and in pain, she had instinctively gone to him to help him. He admitted that although it wasn't so at the time, he was now glad she had, otherwise he would probably be living a lonely life among the other invalids, or maybe not at all. She squeezed him close and flashed all manner of reassuring and loving colors to him. "We are not meant to be alone, we are meant to have family." He agreed. It had taken him a long time to learn that. A life without family was empty. The reason he felt complete with her was because she was his family. Surely his four-armed colony brother felt the same with his family, surely his own three parents as well. He now even felt thankful for his anger and resentment that had stewed in his heart early in his life, for without it, he likely never would have met his beloved. He would take on all the pain, all the torture, all the curious and sympathetic looks he detested just to meet her again. To have her tend his wounds, fix his home, and heal his heart. Whatever future lay ahead of him, he was ready to face it, together with his loved one. His feelings poured through his family heart, and the overseer who watched over them was glad for it. Chapter 24, Lifeblood. It had been quite a number of generations since the proto-wings first appeared. They were now looking more like the wings from my memories, though smaller in size at their current point in development. The changes to their anatomy were also nearly done. I almost couldn't believe how quick this change was to achieve compared to the changes I had made before. My influence was certainly greater than when I had begun. After this last great change, I wondered how I was to use my ever-growing influence. I thought back to Bush Tender and how much of myself it had taken to communicate with her in her dreams. It made me think that for all my great influence in being able to change their bodies, to directly communicate was the far more difficult task my influence could achieve. It could be that was where my future headed, not to influence their bodies, but to influence their minds. Looking at how they dealt with their miniature wings, I saw they had learned how to fold them to keep them out of the way, and found they came in handy for balancing. When outstretched alongside their arms, the primary feathers extended just beyond the reach of their hands. Though not yet long enough for flight, to the lizards who had not had such wings only so many generations ago, they were still quite large. When folded, they reached from just above the shoulders to the base of the tail. They would need to at least reach the ground in their folded position to be large enough to carry them. Despite their current uselessness for flight, they did provide a new communal activity among the winged colonies. Preening between family and colony members became a fun social activity that lizards engaged in, making sure the feathers stayed clean since they were unable to clean them completely on their own. If one lizard had discomfort in their wings, their ability to selectively shimmer could pinpoint the area of discomfort for another lizard to rectify the problem. Such selective shimmering had become the norm for pointing to body parts for any reason around every colony, the control of which had come from Scalesinger's excellent color mastery in her songs. Pinpoint shimmering not only worked for pointing to the body, but also developed as a form of whispering. By shimmering just one part of the body out of sight of others, lizards could effectively speak quietly to each other. The children had fun passing along secret messages, and the adults could more easily surprise loved ones. Not all whispering was for fun and games though. The hunting parties found it easier to track prey when they didn't have to give their position away by shimmering their entire body. Being able to communicate and command from just an arm was incredibly advantageous. They never ceased to amaze me with all the wonders they could achieve outside my influence. While watching over them, mostly just waiting for the wings to complete themselves, whatever sense it was that I had connected to Earth suddenly triggered something within me. It was like a weak tug on a string. I had put so much of myself into forming and hastening the wings, I had not paid much attention to the realm in which they lived. But that tug felt important. As worry started to fill me, it began to feel more foreboding. I decided to follow that string which connected me to the earth, taking myself away from wings for the briefest of moments. I followed the trail that seemed to pull me in, feeling through the rock the further down I went. I could feel my connections with my lizards, now so far above me on the surface, weakening. It was only my family heart that remained with them as I fell ever deeper into the earth. What was down here that called me away? Half of me wanted to race back to my lizards, not wanting to lose proximity to them, but the other half, the one full of fear and apprehension for their safety, kept me continuing downward. I felt myself sliding into the rock, much like I had done with my lizards. I did not realize just how connected I was to the earth. Or perhaps, as time went by, the connection had become stronger. My fear of the earthquake and the tsunami had caused me to pay more attention to the earth under my lizards' feet for some time, and though I desperately wanted to return to my lizards, to their warmth and comforting, for my love of them I dove deeper. The warmth I felt here was different than theirs. It was hot. Suffocating. I could feel its heartbeat, as though it were living. The lifeblood of the earth flowed through here, constantly eating and renewing the rock that sat delicately above it. I let myself fall into the hot blood that encircled the earth. My connection carried me along the flow. It was both foreign and familiar, the heat creating dazzling colors within me. A murmur and roar of noise echoed throughout. Had this been where I was born? Was this where I slipped to when I overextended myself? It certainly felt similar. But there was the slightest discomfort about it. Was the discomfort coming from the liquid fire that flowed in the earth's veins, or from me? As I melted further into it, it became hard to tell. I sought release for my discomfort, and eventually I found a path, and flowed through a small crack. I hoped to find release there. I traveled through the crack, part of the surging lifeblood. From around me, I knew that this path had not existed until recently, it was newly formed. New melt flowed back into the lifeblood that had not been part of it for ages. I traveled faster and faster, desperate for that wanted release. And then I came to it. A great and vast pool of lifeblood. No, after I came to the surface of it, I felt my senses returning, coming back to myself. A roiling, bubbling, endlessly hot substance, while it certainly was the lifeblood of the earth, that was not what my people had called it. They had given it a fearsome name, one that produced both awe and panic: lava. Chapter 25, The Riverside Mountains. Lava. The word sent a chill through me despite the heat. It was close to the surface as well. The vent must have opened during the calamity and been building up ever since. The heat wasn't only formed by the lava itself, the pressure in the enclosed space caused both the temperature and liquid fire volume to rise. As more lava pushed its way up the vent, filling the magma chamber, it continuously built up the pressure. It wasn't ready to blow just yet, but it would be soon. I had to prepare. I wouldn't let such a calamity occur again. As some lava surged upward from the pressure, I escaped with it through another vent in the ceiling of the pool. The lava didn't make it all the way out. Despite its best efforts, the way was blocked by solid rock, but I could go through it. As I passed through the rock, I could feel the mountain around me. There were 2 additional blocked vents the hot magma was trying to break through. All were too close to the surface for comfort. I broke free of the rock to feel my surroundings. It was the first time I had been able to freely view the world away from my lizards. At some point I had stopped trying to see the world on my own, convinced I'd never be able to break away from my lizards, partially from not wanting to. But if I could explore more freely now? No, this wasn't the time for such thoughts. I took in everything. My vision extended in all directions from high atop the mountain, not limited by physical eyes like in my visual memories. My heart sank. I could see the mountainside where my winged lizards currently resided. There was only a fraction of relief to see that it was in the distance. The mountain I stood atop was not theirs. But it was still too close. Not only that, with the massive amount of magma I had been in, I took in the view of the mountain I was over. The caldera of a volcano long since erupted was huge. This was not some minor volcano. This was the center of the old fault line. It dwarfed my lizard's mountain by a large degree. I could not tell just how large the eruption would be, but if they were caught by it, they would be decimated. I was looking at my lizard's mountain across the vast forest that separated me from them. With horror, I realized I was not as separated as I thought. This forest, I knew this forest. This was the forest that lay between the shore and the mountains. This was the forest where my lizards lived. My heart had sunk before, now it was utterly devastated. Even if they all evacuated, where would they go? If the eruption was large enough, it could wipe out the entire forest, and that's where a majority of my lizards lived. I felt myself panicking. Would it end like the last calamity? The shore colonies would be able to swim away, but would they be the only ones left? I didn't want to lose any more colonies. I took in the surrounding view again, looking for any place that might serve as a refuge. There were a few mountains in this range, but none so tall as the one I floated above. They would quickly meet with disaster as well. My lizard's mountain was a bit separated from the range. The forest surrounded that mountain on 3 sides. Behind the mountain was a river that nearly cut through land mass, threatening to break off the tip into its own island. The lizards didn't go there because the river was wide and hard to cross, and the mountains that cropped up immediately on the other side were difficult to pass. Difficult to pass. Could it be? Thoughts formed too quickly for me to actually process. But maybe, just maybe, between the mountainside mountains and river mountains, they would be enough to keep the worst of the disaster away. There was a small forest on the other side of the river mountains that could serve as a second home for an evacuation. Colonies would be forced close together, but hopefully they could manage there until it was safe to return to their previous homes. Yes. This could work. Just like the shore cliffs saved some parts of the forest from the tsunami, these mountains could help prevent some of the effects of an eruption. Hope had been rekindled inside me. It would be a difficult journey to evacuate the forest and mountainside colonies, and the trek to the forest beyond the river would be long, but from the pressure I had felt inside the magma chamber, I believed we would have just enough time. I had to act now. Wings, complete or not, could wait. What influence I had needed to convince the lizards to leave their homes, which I was certain would be a trial all on its own. I was even a bit excited, for all my fears and worries. Excited because this time I could save them. I wouldn't have to just watch from the sidelines as the angry world took its toll on my family. No longer relegated to a bystander who could only warn them minutes from impending disaster. The excitement turned into a fervor to protect them. While in that fervor, I suddenly felt a tingling sensation. It wasn't quite unlike the feeling I got when I had my warning sense triggered about my limited ability to continue influencing the bodies of my lizards. But it felt different, foreign. I had been so intent on looking towards the land where my lizards lived, I did not pay much attention to the other side of the volcanic mountain. But the sensation made me look. Something was there. Something strange, something familiar. It was an impossible feeling to describe. I felt myself reaching out to touch the invisible thing that caught my attention, but as I did, something happened. It was like when I had looked into the rift inside my heart and felt it looking back, such feelings resurfaced now. It was as if the hills I viewed had eyes, and all at once they stared at me, looked at me, saw me. I shrank back. Cringed. Something was out there, and now it knew I was here. Chapter 26, Evacuation. I raced back to my lizards, fearful of the presence I had witnessed. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but it filled me with dread, almost as if there were something wrong with it. A part of me was morbidly curious about it, but mostly, I wanted to be away from it. It frightened me. When I felt myself enter the area of the forest my lizards were in, I felt a wave of relief. I did not realize just how frantic I was to get away until I reached safety. I wanted to hide away, far away from the eyes of the hills. Away from its unblinking stare and what its presence might mean. I wanted to deny its existence though I knew I could not, to pretend I had not been seen. I did not know why being seen caused such fear in me. But I couldn't hide, not from the presence, and certainly not from the volcano biding its time until it erupted in a fiery fury. For now, I would forget the eyes of the hills. I had no time to spare to deal with it, nor even ponder it. My only job now was to ensure the safety of my lizards, so that they may continue for many generations to come. I would deal with the eyes of the hills when the time was right. I formulated my plan as night fell over the region and most lizards retired to their homes for rest. I chose one lizard from each colony, and sent them each the same 2 pictures. First, a vision of a sky aflame, trees turned to ash, and, as much as it pained me, the burnt corpses of lizards littering the ground, a vision of death and destruction. But next, a vision of the grand wide river and the riverside mountains just beyond offering sanctuary to any who came, a vision of hope. There were many colonies, and even just 2 images was incredibly draining. Much of the energy I'd saved for tending the wings was funneled into my warning. It woke all my chosen ones with a start, a cold sweat causing their bodies to shiver despite the warmth of their family. Through the family heart, I sent them feelings of panic and urgency, so that they would know it was not only a dream. Nearly all of them understood the message, a mere 3 not heeding the warning. But that was fine, they would get warnings from the others and then they would know the premonition was true. The forest lizards explained to their families, and eventually the rest of their colony members, about a great and terrible forest fire that would cover the sky, making allusions to the calamity of old. The mountainside colonies delivered much the same message, highlighting the fear with mentions of the calamitous rock slides. And for the shore colonies, they found assurance in escape by the waterways. Messengers were sent around to each colony, confirming that a lizard from every colony had received the same premonition, further verifying the dream's validity. To those who remained skeptical, I sent the same feelings of panic and urgency to convince them of the truth. For the first time in the history of the lizards, a representative of every colony came together in a great conference to discuss the coming danger and form a plan. My heart fluttered with pride at their growing rational thinking. Some representatives were my chosen revelators, some seasoned and knowledgeable elders, others active community members. The shore colony representatives relayed their ability to swim away from the danger, but that they would still assist their land-bound brethren. The others were thankful for the offered aid. Thanks to the image of the riverside mountains, they decided very quickly to make that their destination, as they felt their family heart trying to lead them there. The next big question was how to actually go about the evacuation. I could not give them any ideas this time. What influence I had left needed to be saved for any emergency that might occur. It would be up to them now to determine their path, I had simply provided them with the destination. They conferred for the rest of the day, and decided to produce many baskets to carry personal items, food, and essential materials to their new destination. But just carry baskets wouldn't allow for much to be taken. One of the few defenders at the conference suggested using the field stretchers they had recently begun using to transport injured lizards back to the colonies. It was a crude creation, much like the baskets, with the basket-like weaves around two poles with thick twine at one end to drag, or both ends to carry. The idea was greatly praised, and solved both the problem of transporting larger quantities of items and lizards unable to walk themselves. They couldn't make as many stretchers as baskets, they simply took much time to craft and not many were well versed in their creation yet, but both would serve as valuable transports. The plan was coming together. They would enlist as many lizards as possible to start crafting the baskets and stretchers, while others would work on sorting out what communal foods and items to bring along. Families would choose which personal effects they would bring in their family baskets, but at least one member of each family, if not more, would be needed to contribute manpower to carrying the communal items. It was a good, solid plan. I was incredibly pleased with the conclusion of their conference. Everyone would have a part to play, and in just a few days' time they could begin their trek to the river and beyond. Chapter 26.5, Interlude, The Eyes of the Hills. It came on the big mountain. It reached out to this one. This one saw it on the big mountain. It fled. It went to the other side of the big mountain. What should this one do? This one must always tell the other one what this one sees. This one must go to the other one. The other one must know what this one has seen. Chapter 27, The Long Road. Everything they'd built, all the blood and sweat they poured into the creation of their communities, had to be abandoned. Cultivated farms of foliage along the forest floor, the side of the mountain, even near the shoreline, would have to be left behind with only seeds to begin anew. Some farms had been part of the colonies for many generations now. Bush Tender's original garden still thrived and was well maintained. Despite the conference's conclusion, many lizards were reluctant to leave their family homes. Here, they knew every tree, every rock, every titapool, and their entire history lied in these lands. Beyond the riverside mountains was unknown to but a few, mostly shore colony lizards who had swam far along the shoreline for the thrill of adventure and finding something new. Of all the lizards, it was mostly the children that were excited to find some new mysterious place. They were too young to have become overly attached to their colony's homeland. While most became convinced to leave, a few of the more stubborn ones kept firm. Despite the coming disaster, they wanted to brave the danger in hopes that they could avoid the worst of it. I desperately wished they would go, but their hearts were set on remaining in the place they called home, even if it was doomed to ruin. Of those that chose to remain, most were already elderly, and if they were fated to die soon anyway, they would rather do it at home with a chance to live and keep the colony's old home alive. For all my persuasion, the final decision had always been theirs. I would not force them to leave, I could only encourage. For the next few days, other than the patrols to keep aggressive creatures away, everyone contributed to crafting the baskets and stretchers needed for the evacuation. Even those that were staying behind gave a helping hand. They may have decided to remain in their homeland, but they did not begrudge the rest leaving and assisted where they could. A pall hung over each of the colonies as they worked. The journey would be long. From the distance those that had visited described, it would take a couple moon cycles or more to reach their destination as their pace would be slow. When they rested in their homes at night, they took stock of their personal belongings, deciding which were the most precious and which they could stand to part with. The scale songs were quiet in those tension-filled times. For my part, I kept an eye on the mountain and the magma chamber. As the pressure built, the earth began trembling in greater frequency, to the point they began to feel such tremors in the forest's colonies closest to the volcanic mountain. Through my connection to the earth, I could feel a constant background noise as the magma continued to move in earnest as a deep and low inaudible harmonic tremor. And as several days passed, it was finally time to go. Those that stayed bid farewell to their extended family, giving loving head bumps and filling their scales with colors for a safe journey. The trek began from the forest colonies nearest the volcanic mountain, heading towards the river in a slow unrevealing march. Along the way, the other colonies joined up, walking in line with the rest. Thanks to their connected family hearts, they knew when the others were close to begin their own journey forward. A river of lizards filed through the forests, and any that might have been excitedly anticipating a grand new adventure were quickly sobered after only a few days on the path. Had they been able to travel more quickly, it may only have taken only one moon cycle to reach their destination, but as it was, the trek was hard, and the road was long. Eventually those of the mountainside colonies joined up, and about half of the shore colonies fell in line to help carry loads and offer support until the long line of lizards reached the river. Already the other half of the shore colonies were making preparations by the river and in the new refuge. Their ability to swim fast and take advantage of swift currents were a great benefit in the water. After a full moon cycle since the first colonies had begun the journey, they finally came to the river. It was long and wide, an imposing figure blocking their way to the riverside mountains just beyond the water's reach. It would have been difficult to cross if not for the efforts of the shore colony lizards. They had strapped felled logs together, reaching from one side of the river to the other, with crude planks tied between them to allow a space to walk. Not knowing the techniques needed to raise the bridge above the water, the bridge undulated with the movement of the wide river. Many lizards were unsteady on the hastily constructed bridge, some having to get on their hands to crawl across. A line of shore lizards ferried goods across the water so that the land-bound lizards would not have to carry them on the unsteady bridge, and also rescued any lizards that fell off the constantly swaying contraption. The teamwork was a sight to behold. Although the shore lizards could very easily have left their land-bound brethren to their fate, they had single-handedly saved the others from the most difficult task of the journey by giving them a way to cross the river in safety. And although it took many days for all the lizards to cross the river, eventually that dreaded part of the journey was done. Once lizards got to the other side of the bridge and retrieved their goods ferried by the shore lizards, they fell back into line. With the river behind them, their spirits lifted as they saw the safety of the towering riverside mountains that would guard them from the danger to come. It felt like they were nearly there, though they still had much of the journey left, yet half for those from the closer colonies, but only a third for those from the furthest colonies. Some of the strong youths and adults set out to go directly over the mountain to reach the refuge colony faster and help those from the shore colony prepare for the arrival of such a great number of lizards. With so many lizards in the line, they could not all hope to brave the mountain and safely reach the other side. They had to go the long way around the base to the south and follow the southern shore to the forest. For the length of the trek, most other animals stayed wary of the unending line of lizards, and only a few desperate predators attempted to make a meal of them. Lizards from the mountainside who had never left their rocky and sparsely treed home found many animals indigenous to the forest quite interesting, but also found some annoying bugs that preferred the warmer climate. Creatures that had never crossed the river, nor journeyed over the thin strip of land on the northern side of the landmass were curious and wary of these new and strange beings making their way around the mountain. The lizards of the mountain expedition made good time over the mountains, using fire to keep warm on the chilly nights as they ascended over the terrain with its melting snow. They were welcomed with open arms by the shore families who had been doing their best to gather enough brush and wood that would be needed to build new homes. The forest lizards that had scaled the mountain barely took any time to rest and immediately set upon the task of building the structures the coming conglomerate colony would need. Homes were built much closer together than in their home colonies as they tried to conserve space. Using their endless ingenuity, they began to construct homes in sets of 4, each home sharing a common wall with 2 other homes. This allowed them to save on both materials and space. And instead of their normal central hub built in the middle of colonies, they built several that could each serve as a place for storage and gathering, thus easing the future congestion from lizards that would need access to the stores. By the time the first lizards from the long line arrived, it had been 2.5 moon cycles since they began their journey. About a third of the needed structures were already ready for use, a great head start. The main group was tired and exhausted from the long and arduous journey, and took a well-deserved rest before aiding their brothers and sisters in construction. Over the next several days, lizards continued to arrive at the refuge, expanding it from the central starting point ever outward. The lizards were crammed together, trying to take up as little space as possible, but thanks to their great teamwork they managed to make it work. When the last lizards arrived, it was apparent only a small number had been lost on the long journey. Some of the elder lizards that came on the long road couldn't hold out between the stress and physical exhaustion of the journey, despite their best efforts to continue, and some of the weak and sickly suffered similar ends. Not wanting to leave their dead to the wilderness, the already overburdened lizards had taken on the additional burden of carrying the departed to the river or southern shores for their watery burial. For those they could save, materials and goods were divided among other stretchers and baskets in order to carry the weakened lizards to their refuge destination. All in all, for all the sadness, homesickness, and loss of family, they had done well to reach the refuge without any major incident. The other half of the moon cycle was spent organizing, getting families into homes, constructing more homes, and figuring out new sources of food to collect from. Those that brought seeds began planting to renew lost gardens so that they may again tend to their renewable food and material supply. There was tension in the air as many were apprehensive if everything would work out okay, and more than a few arguments broke out amongst the stressed lizards and their families. But as the days passed and they settled into new routines, calm began to descend upon the great refuge colony of lizards. The shore lizards, now free to tend to their own, sought out new homes amidst the kelp forests by the new reefs, spreading out around all three sides of the new refuge land, south, west, and north. The mountainside lizards, missing their rocky home, eventually migrated to the riverside mountains once things settled down in the main colony. But the calm was not to last for long. The very danger that sent them here in the first place roared ever louder in my earth-connected ears as the mountain reached its breaking point. It could no longer hold back the heat and the pressure building inside and sought relief for its agony. The ground had bulged above where the lava gathered, eagerly awaiting sweet release. I sent a last warning through the family heart that the eruption was imminent. Several lizards of the refuge colony decided to scale the riverside mountain summit. They needed, to witness the disaster that drove them all from their homes. Chapter 28, Eruption. I stood at the top of the riverside mountains. Just like the lizards that also ascended to the summit, I had to see it for myself. The coming flames would no doubt hurt, but we had to witness it, and it was the duty of the lizards with me on the mountain to tell the others what would occur this day, for surely it would also become a scale song to tell all coming generations. The harmonic tremors felt at the forest during the evacuation didn't reach this far, but through my connection to the earth, and those lizards that remained behind, I could still feel the gentle buzz continue in the ground. And all at once, the buzzing noise ceased. The entirety of the earth grew still, and for just a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. Even the wind ceased to blow, creating a truly and eerily silent world. It was the calm before the storm. The lizards who had been setting up camp on the cold mountaintop also picked up on the foreboding silence and turned their attention to the mountain in the distance. Then it came. It started as a deep rumble that could even be felt this far away. A single, thin plume of smoke escaped from the top of the faraway mountain. Its message was clear, the eruption was to begin. And from that plume, the cone of the mountain quickly erupted into flame and smoke. The smoke towered higher and higher, unsatisfied until it could reach the top of the sky. The plume grew and multiplied, like the dark and scary brother of a puffy white cloud. It ate the sky, hiding it from view. Flashes of fire could be seen inside the dark clouds, reminding us that where there is smoke, there is most definitely fire. And then the sound came. It was so far away we had seen the explosion before we heard it. A great roar descended upon the riverside mountain, flowing into the forest behind it, filling every crevice with its explosive bellow. The lizards had only heard of the great roar of calamitous earthquake in their scale songs, but this would resound forever in their hearts, a noise that could be felt through the entire body. The scouts atop the mountain sought comfort in each other's presence. I too sought comfort with them as the sound of eruption continued, explosion after explosion. The lizards that stayed behind huddled together, praying for the best, but expecting the worst. The lifeblood of the earth had yearned to be free, and nothing could hope to stop it. Even in their fear, the lizards atop the mountain kept vigil, their feelings reflecting my own. We must see this to the end. The great cloud mushroomed into the sky, spreading out in all directions, raining ash and balls of hellfire on the earth below, punishing it for trying to keep the magma contained. A laughable notion, nothing could contain the fires of earth. And the moment I hoped would not come to be finally came to pass. The smoke, heavy with rock, fire, and gas descended down the mountain like a great, black avalanche. Its speed was incredible, nothing on this earth could hope to outrun it. It ran down the mountain, eager to reach the base and spread itself over the land. The rumble of its passing was not unlike the sound of an earthquake. A pang rang through my heart as it reached the forest. Its force was great and terrible, and awe-inspiring for its destructiveness. I could feel the trees in the distance cave to the force denser than a hurricane. Even if the trees were not uprooted by its passing, the heat inside the insidious dark cloud burnt them to cinders. It was the pyroclastic flow. The slow-moving and all-consuming lava could not hold a candle to the destructive force of the flow. One might be hit by lava that had exploded out of the caldera, but rarely did it move fast enough that you could not get out of the way in time. It was a slow killer by comparison. It would slowly take over the base of the mountain and extend out into the forest, that much was true, but the pyroclastic flow could reach farther, move faster, and kill more than lava could ever hope to achieve. The lizards in the homeland forest made peace with themselves and those around them, now knowing the ferocity of the volcano was not one they would live through. To their family heart, they wished for the continued happiness of those that lived through this disaster. And in an instant, their lives were snuffed out as the pyroclastic flow invaded their homes, setting everything aflame, and passed through without pause, nor a care for what it had destroyed. A secondary explosion occurred on the far side of the volcano, likely one of the other vents capitulating to the pressure deep inside the mountain. It added to the smoke and the flame rising out of the primary caldera. The fires of the mountain would not be quelled any time soon. It lasted deep into the night, the light of the lava more visible in the darkness. No stars appeared that night, not with the smoke taking over the entirety of the sky as darkness had fallen over the land. Only the red sunset, well below the clouds, bid a final farewell to world. The mountaintop lizards eventually returned to the forest of refuge, seeing that the eruption would continue on for some time. They would go back and relay what they had seen to those waiting below. With heavy hearts, they descended from the cold and blazing summit. I stayed on, watching the event for days as the volcano threw ever more ash and smoke into the air, as its fires laid waste to the forest, and as the pyroclastic flows ate everything within their long and terrible reach. Chapter 29, An Old Foe. The riverside mountains were far enough away to escape the brunt of the volcano's destructive force. But the dark clouds that continued to cover the sky created a somber atmosphere in the refuge colonies, as if the sky was reflecting their own hearts. Ash fell from the sky like grey snow, littering the ground. The once black rock took on a lighter grey tone as the porous holes were filled and covered. Many homes collapsed under the weight of the ash before the lizards learned they must keep the roofs clear. Young saplings suffocated and turned black in death. Coughing filled the air as much as the ash, particularly affecting the young, the old, and the weak. Even along the shore, the falling ash ruined more than its fair share of gills, causing the shore lizards to retreat deep beneath the waves and not resurface but for those with incomplete gills. No sunlight appeared with the heavy clouds overhead, and the ash fall was too thick to see much of the dawn or dusk light. As depression and stress levels rose, arguments and fights filled the overpopulated colony. There wasn't enough room, food was difficult to find, and the fresh water was tainted. Although they had been able to escape death from the fiery end that had awaited them in the forest, it still managed to find them here. The world was cruel to the living, always making them fight for survival. The dawn did eventually return, but spirits remained low. The volcanic mountain had finally been sated, and the only sign that it was still alive was the thin plume of smoke that continued to leak from the caldera. From the peaks of the riverside mountain, the devastation was much more apparent. Between the refuge and the volcano, dark paths of black created a road of ruin from one mountain to the next. But there was hope. Some pieces far from the volcano had managed to stay out of reach, and those small bits of green, like an oasis in the desert, would surely provide shelter for other survivors. I was only sad that none of those survivors would be my lizards that had remained behind. With a heavy heart, I turned away from the volcano to the ash-covered refuge of my lizards. They seemed beyond my ability to comfort. They had left everything they'd ever known, and now in this new place there seemed to be only death, broken homes, and ruined spirits. Even as they worked to repair the damage from the ash, their hearts were not in it. It was as if I looked upon a society utterly defeated. They were weary. Their bodies were tired from the journey, and their hearts were tired from the losses. Even the promise of new life wasn't to be, as several clutches that hatched among the ever-persistent ash succumbed quickly to its deadly clutches. I could not comfort them, for I felt as devastated as they were, and my small light of hope from the forest could not fill the darkness that currently hung over them. It was not something that could be fixed in a day. It took time to heal and clear away the ash. But as the ash ceased to fall, with each layer cleared away, light began to return to the world. Each layer brushed away shed more light on their hearts, and though it took time, I did eventually see some happy and colorful shimmers return to their scales and feathers. They were not as vibrant as before the volcano, but even a small splash of color was uplifting. For this generation, the loss of home and family could not be overcome, but there would eventually be some happiness again. With most of the ash gone, the young hatchlings were finally able to breathe in their new home, and life seemed to start to return to their new refuge. Seeds eventually began to sprout through the ground, no longer clogged with grey poison. The forest that slept through the disaster finally began to awaken as sounds of insects and small creatures filled the morning air. Curiosity was returning to the colonies as they started exploring their new home. The new young who only knew of life in the forest of refuge were the driving force behind the exploration. Hunting parties again sought out new food as they discovered prime places to stalk, and foragers found strange new plants with edible flowers and delicious fruits. The life that had once seemed as if it was about to fade was returning. The world was cruel to the living, but working together they could make it through. The story of the volcano became a commonly recounted scale song, singing of the prophets who had received the vision of flame, the great exodus across the river, and the angry clouds and fire that had rained from the faraway mountain. Much like the scale song of the great calamity, it was a song of tragedy and death that must not be forgotten, but always at the end was the reminder of hope. They had lived to sing of the tragedies, and life was able to continue despite the world's efforts to end it. They had been tested time and again, and they had survived together. That is what the song taught the young. During a hunt for food, a young hunter had been humming the song on his scales as they waited for a scout to return with news on a passing herd of long-haired antelope-like animals. They were nimble creatures that lived in the riverside forest, and they were very quick. The hunting party had to ambush from multiple sides to be able to take one down, and relied on the intel of the scout to engage in a proper formation. A party mate asked why the young hunter hummed such a sad song out here. His reply was that while it was a sad song, it filled him with the drive to be more than he was yesterday. Should his people ever find themselves in such a catastrophe again, he wanted to be strong enough to support everyone. His party mate thought deeply about the young hunter's words, but didn't get a chance to reply before the scout returned, bursting through the trees and bushes. The hunting party expected a quick report, but instead found the small lizard out of breath, flaring with colors of danger. They tried to ask what caused her to be so out of sorts, but her replies were muddled in a mix of haste and fear. One message came across crystal clear: run. But her message was not quick enough, for it dropped through the trees above their heads, landing on one unfortunate member, the crush the bones and impact of weight resounding through the now silent forest. I knew this beast. It had changed since I had last seen it, but the terror it inflicted upon my lizards remained. The great snake had grown on par with my lizards, making it a giant among the forest, yet still somehow able to hide amongst the trees unseen. The dark green and red mottled monster had a plethora of small horns facing backwards from the crown of its brow to the holes it had for ears. And this time when it unfurled its fangs to strike, a strange phenomenon occurred. In its mouth, flashes of sparks could be seen, but it wasn't until it lashed out at a member of the stunned hunting party that I knew it for what it was. Lightning. Its mouth was electrified, paralyzing the lizard it latched onto. Tossing the useless lizard aside, content to devour it later, it prepared for another strike. The shock of the giant predator was broken with a vocal call from the young hunter. For those that could see him, he shouted with his scales, calling the hunting party into an anti-predator formation. His spear was shaking as he faced the giant snake, but his fear of losing his hunting mates was greater than his fear of the great predator. The lizards moved closer to each other to be able to cover for each member. Against a foe that could attack as quickly as this one, it was suicide to not stay together, lest they be picked off one by one. When the snake tried to strike again, it was faced with the points of several spears, causing it to recoil. It watched the lizards as they fell into formation, the small scout at the back with her own stone dagger. It seemed to rethink its plan of attack and started moving around the group. The lizards were mindful of its bobbing head, and only the scout thought to look behind. It was too late when she cried out as she saw the tail whip towards them, crashing into their group and breaking their formation. It took the moment of panic to strike again, catching another lizards in its massive jaws. The hunting party was down to 4 members plus the scout. The scout kept an eye on the surroundings while the hunting party again regrouped. The more seasoned hunting party members could see from the snake's eyes that it was old, but by no means feeble. No, this was a strong beast with much experience hunting prey both weak and strong. As the party and the snake came to a standstill, they began to quickly try and formulate a plan. Run! Too dangerous! Agreed, danger to the colony. Kill it! Agreed. How? Their scales flashed in rapid succession. To the snake, it was no more than an enticing and curious dance of lights. It again tried to surprise them with its tail, but the scout was ready and gave enough warning. The young hunter was able to turn in time to stab the tail before it could swipe their whole party again. The snake reacted to the pain, quickly retreating with its tail and putting more space between them. It didn't back up out of fear though, it just gave itself more time to come up with its own plan of attack against clever prey. The great snake sparked its mouth in warning, daring them to come closer. One member took the bait, dashing forward with a quick cover me flashed on his scales. The others tried to react in time, but the snake's taunt had worked as it planned, and once the brave lizard got close enough, it flicked the brave hunter in the head with its tail from the side and snatched him up in his momentary daze. The remaining lizards retreated back farther, hoping to stay out of reach. They were running out of members and running out of options. Surprisingly, it wasn't one of the hunting party that came up with the next plan, but the scout. It was a difficult plan, but with the snake's speed and power, they didn't have much choice. After they all agreed on what needed to be done, the party mate that had spoken with the young hunter before the snake arrived dashed away into the forest. The snake did not give chase, it was not so foolish. Down to 2 hunters and the small scout, the snake was sure to eat well this day. The snake again began to make a wide circle around the remaining party members. For the remaining lizards, they could only hope their runner would make it in time. To delay the snake, the 2 hunters would make feints and retreat, however the snake only fell for the false charge twice before it picked up on their game. As the snake continued to slowly circle the party, they would also circle the snake to stay out of reach of its tail. The snake was very patient, it would not rush an assured meal, though the flashes on their scales did tempt it. While circling the delicious meal to be, the snake was very slowly closing the distance between them. If it could get within striking range, it may incur a few injuries, but it would be able to kill them all. Then its clever prey did something unexpected. One charged straight for it, with the other 2 not far behind, flashing in a brilliance of colors. The snake hesitated as the 3 charged in a line, all brandishing the points of their weapons. The young hunter ran at the front, fully prepared for what was to come. He held his spear close to his body and mentally prepared for his attack. The snake's hesitation was only for an instant and it struck out at the young hunter in front. Long fangs penetrated his body as he was rapidly lifted away from the line, the snake retreating as it snagged its prey. But the spear was held close to his body for a reason. As a spark was about to electrify the prey, the young hunter jabbed his spear into the roof of the great beast's mouth. Even as the beast cried out in pain from its soft tissue being penetrated, the spark still activated, electrifying the lizard and the roof of its own mouth. The young hunter was thrown away as the snake writhed in agony. Too preoccupied with its own pain, it did not see as its doom descended from the tree above. The runner had gone back into the trees and quickly climbed after he was out of eyesight and scrambled across branches to make it back to the hunting party. There he waited as the snake and group slowly circled each other, the hunters keeping the snake's attention while periodically flashing to ask if the runner was in position. When he finally flashed back out of the snake's line of vision, they only had to wait until the snake came under the runner's tree before attacking to fully lock its attention on them. Then the runner used the snake's own surprise tactic against it and dropped down with gravity as his ally, and struck the head of the snake beast. The force of impact penetrated the spear deep into the snake's flesh, beyond its intimidating scales, just behind the frightening horns. There was a distinct crunch felt and heard by the runner as the spear drove home. The runner was thrown as the great beast entered its death throes, desperately trying to live though it knew its end was imminent. It thrashed about and the scout and remaining hunter backed out of its reach. After a few moments, the snake limply tried to move until it could move no more. The eyes of the great beast, once blazing with a life long lived, now looked cold and empty. The hunter ran to the runner who had been thrown from a great height atop the snake, and was found to be badly injured, unable to move his legs. The scout went to the young hunter and found him already perished from blood loss by the massive fangs of the snake. His scales were singed from the electricity as the others had been, but his death was sure from the moment he volunteered to charge at the head of the line towards the snake. The bodies of the other dead littered the ground, too numerous for the hunter and small scout to take back on their own. Instead, they focused their efforts on bringing the runner back safely to the colony. Before they left the scene, the runner wanted to see the young hunter one more time. Although the young hunter could no longer see, the runner told him in somber shimmers that he now understood why he had hummed such a sad song, and that his sacrifice had saved the colony from a monstrous foe. Truly, it was a small catastrophe averted. Carrying the half-paralyzed runner on his back, the last hunter set off towards the colony, the scout moving to take the lead after she took in one last look of the scene of carnage. 4 hunters had been killed and 1 paralyzed, but the beast was dead. It would not be able to terrorize the colonies as its ancestor had, and I was just as proud of them as I was heartbroken for their loss. Their bravery had saved the loss of countless lives, and the young hunter had fulfilled his desire to save his colony from disaster. I took their memories into me, and I could feel the memory of Starlight satisfied that the lizards could now overcome such a terrible foe. I was happy for them beyond what words could convey. I was confident that my lizards could survive. They had lived through my selfish whims and all the terrors this world had to offer them, and they had survived. Even if the whole world became their enemy, they would survive. Chapter 30, A Blossom in the Heart. Together we had overcome all the trials and tribulations to come our way. It was a very satisfying feeling to see my lizards being so capable and able to care for themselves. While still able to give them guidance, they were quite adept at discovering things on their own thanks to their natural curiosity and willingness to try new things. While I focused on finishing the wings that had been put on pause, I watched as my lizards began adjusting to their new homes. Unlike in their home forest, there were no cliffs separating the shores from the forest of refuge, and relations between the shore colonies and other colonies greatly increased. Trade became more abundant than ever, and the shore colonies were able to help supplement the food of the forest with fish and seaweed in much greater amounts than before. The influence of the shore colonies, in particular their competitive games of strength of agility, led to a certain discovery one day during a hunt for the agile leaping antelope beasts of the forest. The lizards referred to the animals as quick springs for their ability to move quickly and spring high into the air to get away from danger. Their short-ribbed horns that pointed backwards were rarely cause for concern as long as a lizard didn't stand in front of one, and often they would leap over the lizards and avoid physical contact if possible. A group of hunters was setting up an ambush both around the target area and above it, the technique given to them by the hunters of the great snake beast. After scaring the quick springs toward the ambush point, the hunters jumped from their positions, spears out, to impale the beasts for their meat and hide. One of the tree ambushers, however, missed his target, landing himself instead of the spear on the back of a quick spring. Not knowing what to do by the unexpected turn of events, the lizard held on tightly as the quick spring attempted to dislodge the predator atop its back. It ran, jumped, and bucked until eventually the lizard could hold on no more and was flung to the side, the beast escaping into the trees. The failed ambusher was laughed at by the hunting party as several others confirmed their own successful kills, and although embarrassed and sporting new bruises, he laughed with them. The ride had been scary but also exhilarating. The adrenaline rush made him want to try again, and see how long he could last. Inspired by the games of the shore lizards, he sparked the idea of a competition to see who could stay on the back of a quick spring the longest. Amused and intrigued, the hunting party agreed after they brought back their spoils. They again set up another ambush, but this time they did not use their spears, and the ground ambushers' jobs were just to herd the quick springs to the right area, while the tree ambushers would attempt to stay atop the bucking quick springs. As another herd of quick springs came into view, the first rider's adrenaline rose with anticipation at the coming thrill. The thrill-seeker now timed his jump for landing on top of the beast rather than trying to spear it, a difficulty in and of itself, but he did manage another fantastic ride, along with several other members, before being thrown tail first to the ground. Ripples of color and laughter filled his scales. He had lasted even longer that time, and much longer than any of the other lizards that tried. Everyone seemed to enjoy the new game. Though it did not give them any food or materials, it did give them a fun thrill. Their fun game sparked a memory within me of my people on the backs of great beasts of burden, riding like the wind, faster than their legs could carry them. The beasts that had once been wild were tamed and trained to follow the commands of its rider. Image after image flashed through my memory of the great achievements the beasts allowed, completely changing our history. I had remembered about crop farming, but the memories of animal domestication didn't come to me until now. When the memory ceased, I looked upon the quick springs as my lizards did, and saw in them the lizard's future. To the thrill-seeker who was already enamored with the beasts, it did not take much convincing from me to make him see the same future I did. All he needed was a single image of himself upon the back of a quick spring, not hanging on for dear life, but instead riding with the beast. Although just an image, the feeling of synergy between lizard and beast was carried with it, riding off into a future of untold possibilities. It made me smile to see the glittering colors of pleasant dreams dance across his scales as he slept and dreamed into the night. The next day, the thrill-seeker thought long about how to capture a quick spring. He knew how to kill one and how jump on its back, but as far as taking it into his custody, he was at a loss. The beast would not simply follow him because he desired it, and they were very skittish, particularly since they were hunted by the lizards. That he could now see the beast as both a source of food and companionship was an odd feeling for him, and he decided to give proper thought to those strange, seemingly conflicting, feelings. He spoke with his bachelor group about his thoughts. They wondered what he would do with the beast if he would not eat it. To them, it seemed a waste of food and hide. To the lizards that hadn't tried to hang on to the backs of the quick springs, it was difficult to explain. They wished him well with his odd endeavor as he went to seek out the other members of his hunting party to see if they also thought his idea was strange. His hunting party, while they didn't share the same zeal about the idea as the thrill-seeker, they did at least understand his concept for desiring to ride on the back of one for longer than a few seconds. "What will you do if you capture one?" one member shimmered on her scales in question. He responded, "I would go many places." When asked where he would go, his eyes took on a very far-away look, one full of dreams, hopes, ambitions, and wonder. "I would go anywhere. Everywhere. To the edge of the world and beyond." Giggling glimmers of color spread across the faces and arms of the party at his enthusiasm, not in jest, but out of being impressed and amused. To them, the day before yesterday the thrill-seeker had just been a youth full of energy but nowhere to use it. He had been put into a hunting party as a way to release that unending energy, but now he was driven, like he had found his purpose. Although they could not understand the scope of his dreams, as the edge of the world sounded very far away, they were glad for him that he at last had a goal. As they discussed how he would capture one, a member wondered where he would keep it. You couldn't keep it in one of their pit shelter homes, and they were able to leap high enough to clear any kind of wall you might build around them. That realization put a damper on the thrill-seeker's mood, bringing him back from the edge of the world to reality. But, in a typical youthful consequence-free manner, the thrill-seeker concluded he would think about that when the time came. It caused another uproarious laugh through the group as some of the older members reminisced their own youthful endeavors. At the very least, more than housing the beast, more than capturing it, the thrill-seeker came to realize one thing. He first had to stay on its back. Before visions of grandeur could completely cloud his vision, he wanted to make the image from his dream a reality and stay on the back of a quick spring long enough to feel the wind on his scales, not the ground on his back. Although today was not one of their hunting days, the party agreed to accompany him out to the forest and help him get onto the back of another quick spring. The first 2 attempts to ride a quick spring landed the thrill seeker on the ground in a matter of seconds, but by the 3rd attempt he was finally getting the hang of it. Through trial and error, he learned that the placement of his weight to maintain balance was key, and a good hold on the coarse fur on the neck or shoulders made it a little easier to hold his posture. Having his legs straddling the back of the beast like in his dream made his ride attempts last much longer as he was able to shift his weight around following the motions of the beast. His party mates were impressed with how quickly he improved, inspiring some to give it another go as well using the thrill seeker's newly discovered methods. None could last as long as he, but if nothing else, it was a good bit of fun. After losing count of how many beasts he'd attempted to ride, the thrill seeker finally got on the back of a quick spring that after futilely trying to buck him off a couple times, changed tactics and instead sprinted for the trees. The thrill seeker clung to the fur for all he was worth, hugging his legs as tight as he could to the sides of the beast. It was scary, but more than that it was thrilling. Forcing himself to keep his eyes open, he saw as the trees flew by with the quick spring running and leaping between them. He felt like he was faster than the wind that rushed across his body. He wished the journey would never end, thinking he may just reach the edge of the world, but that trip was cut short as the quick spring again changed tactics back to bucking. The thrill seeker was unprepared for the sudden shift and was promptly thrown into the air, landing on his back hard enough to knock the wind out of him. The quick spring then took off again, eager to get away from the creature that had tried to claim its back. Trying to regain his breath, the thrill seeker looked upwards through the trees, seeing hints of blue skies dotting through the green boughs. What a ride! He reminisced that feeling, capturing it so that he may recall it later. The sight of the trees blurring as they ran by, the sound of the wind across his ear holes, the sensation of the furry body he gripped combined with the rush of wind over his scales. It was exhilarating. He never wanted to forget, and hoped he'd have many more experiences like that. Finally he heard vocal calls from his party mates that were searching for him after the beast had dashed away. He responded to their calls a bit hoarsely as his lungs still burned from the crash. His party found him still on his back on the forest floor. They were worried as they bent down to check on him, but the colors forming on his scales were ones of pleasure and satisfaction. Apparently there had been no need to worry. They picked him up and put him back on his wobbly feet and he tried to remember how to walk. When he mentioned he wanted another go, the party stared at him and his audacity, then after a moment burst again into laughter at this cheeky fellow who was not only not discouraged, but immediately wanted to try again. His fighting spirit emanating from his family heart sparked a fire in theirs. The thrill seeker only wished he could convey those same feelings to the beast as he rode on its back. The group did take a small break to let the thrill seeker rest up a bit before continuing on, and after having a little breather, a couple split off to again search for the herd they had been terrorizing all day. As the stench of blood and death was absent from the area, the herd didn't travel too terribly far in between their trials and stayed fairly easy to locate. The rest of the party set up at the predetermined area, and the thrill seeker readied himself on a low branch near the ground. He heard the clicking of hooves on the black rock as the quick springs ran from their pursuers. The thrill seeker became hyper-focused as several beasts came into view, and his world for a brief moment only consisted of himself and them. He watched them as they leapt about, waiting for the right moment, then he jumped. It felt as if time slowed down as he watched his legs aim for the right position on the beast now in slow motion. When he landed, he quickly adjusted his balance, gripped hard with his legs and his hands, and like last time, clung for dear life as the animal began bucking. The thrill seeker constantly shifted his weight, paying close attention to the movements of the quick spring, and using all the experience he had gained that day about their habits to remain upright. After a while of jumping and leaping about, this quick spring also changed to the tactic of sprinting to dislodge the interloper upon its back. Again the thrill seeker let his balance fall in line with the motions from the quick spring. They took off through the trees, dodging thick trunks and leaping over bushes, but the thrill seeker held on. He was better at thinking on the fly than formulating large complex plans of action, but flying through the forest did not even afford him that luxury. He wanted to tell the quick spring of his desire, and wanted to know if it too wanted to see the edge of the world. But the beast did not understand the colors swirling on his scales. I came to him in that moment when his desire reached its peak, about to break under the stress of being unable to release it and calling out to me. I fell in line with the thrill seeker as if I too were trying to ride on the back of the quick spring. The memories of history and my own personal experience atop a riding beast calmly flowed into the lizard. And with one last push, both of us desiring to ride the beast together, our two hearts and minds as one, a voiceless cry resounded. It was like a soundless thunder that rippled and blossomed over the three of us. The place in the middle of the thrill seeker's chest where the family heart resided sent a light blue wave of color across his skin. To my limitless eyes, it seemed as if the blue color also washed over the quick spring from where the lizard and beast were connected. Silence came over the area by a small stream where the quick beast had halted. As if coming out of a trance, the echo of the shared pulse between rider and beast faded as his heart settled and the sound of the world around him returned. His half-lidded eyes sprang open as he came to realize he was no longer moving, the beast beneath him stopped in its tracks. Its chest rose and fell with heavy breaths as it regained its energy from the tiring sprint. I disconnected myself from the thrill seeker and watched as it finally dawned on him that the beast was no longer trying to remove him from its back. His heartbeat rapidly increased, a strange unbelievable happiness spread over his scales and through his family heart. Adrenaline filled his body, his goal of riding a beast complete. But now he was at a loss. He didn't know what to do. The memories I'd shared with him when we were connected were hazy at best, but he recognized that rider and beast moved as one unit. He did not know how to urge the quick spring forward now that he had accomplished his first goal. Just like the moment he desperately committed to memory of his first real ride on the beast, he now fell into that same state of mind, trying to recall every detail of his experience. After reliving his own memory, on a whim, he focused on his family heart and the beast. Through his heart he shared his desire to travel, to run together again, to reach new heights and the farthest edges of the world. He resonated with the beast, sharing his emotions and dreams. And then, through the heart, he willed his new partner forward. The quick spring then took the first step towards their now shared future. That day, both the thrill seeker and I learned something new about ourselves. I could connect with the lizards on a much deeper level than I ever imagined, and if their desire was great enough, the lizards themselves could connect and share their family